I got a question for you this morning as we get started. Have you ever seen a dog chase its tail? And some of you are like, well, I don't know, I have cats. I'm sorry. I really am. I'm sorry. But I have two boxer dogs, and they can't really chase their tail because they got them clipped off. And as you can see, they don't really chase much of anything anymore. That's kind of an action shot. But I have seen a dog chase its tail, and it's amazing. Take a look at this. It's crazy how, they're so happy, they're so focused, they're so simple-minded that this is entertaining to them, and they find that fun, and it makes them happy. And then I realized we're watching a dog chase its tail and going, oh, and we're happy. And, maybe we're as simple-minded as the dogs are sometimes. And, hey, if the worst thing that happens to you is somebody tells you you're kind of like a dog, then you should be proud, right? I'm happy when people come home. I'm excited. People are excited to see me. That's not a bad thing, right? There is a way that we're kind of like dogs. That's not so good, though. Just like the dog chasing his tail is ultimately kind of some meaningless energy being expired and just kind of running in circles and doing this stuff. Sometimes, we don't do it on purpose. We kind of chase meaningless things too. And here's how come this happens. We have these playlists running through our heads. And on this playlist, there's only about 4 or 5 songs. There's not very many songs on this playlist. And the tragedy of it all is that 2 or 3 of them are pretty much straight up lies. But here's the ironic part about all of this. We know this playlist is going through our heads. We know it. We hear it all the time. And we know that the playlist is lying to us, but we still listen to it. We still believe it. And I'll tell you, give you 2 examples at least of some of the things that are constantly running through your minds that you're tending to believe, even though you know they're not true. We all do this. 2 of those songs have to do with the work that you do and with the wealth that you own. And kind of here's how it goes. We keep getting told on repeat over and over and over that the way to get the satisfying life, the way to live a rich life, the way to have a meaningful, purpose-filled life is to have the perfect job. To work at the job that you love, and you'll never spend a day working, and you'll accomplish all this, and you'll do so many great things, and it'll be so fantastic if you could just get the right job. And we know it's not true. But we believe that it is. We act like it's true. The same way with money. We have this thing running through our head that just tells us, and the crazy thing is everybody's number is different. But if I ever got this much money, whatever the number is, if I ever got to that amount of money, that amount of wealth, then I would have that rich, satisfying, full life. I wouldn't have to worry about things. Everything would be great, and I know my life would be fantastic. And yet again, we know it's not true. We absolutely know it's not true. As a matter of fact, if somebody asked you, walking out of the building today or even walking into the building this morning, hey, is your life defined by your work? Is the value of your life based on the work that you do? You'd be like, well, no, of course not. And even more so if somebody said, well, money, is the purpose and meaning of your life, do you find it in the amount of money that you have? If you could just get enough, then everything would be great. No, of course not. We say that, but in the very next breath, and I'm guilty, we'll talk about how we love our job or we hate our job. We'll talk about how much we need to get to do this thing, or we're saving up for that thing, or that one day we're going to have enough and we're going to be able to. And it seems like we know it's a lie in our heads. But when it comes to our hands, sometimes we act like it's true. I'm going to tell you about somebody you've heard of. He's famous, and if you legitimately have not heard of him today, I want you to come up afterwards and tell me, because I'm taking like a little personal poll. But I want to tell you about somebody that's famous that I'm pretty sure you know. His name is Michael Jordan, and he is the best basketball player of all time. Sorry, LeBron fans. He is the best basketball player of all time. He's won championships. He's won MVPs. He's an all-star. The other elite basketball players marvel at how good he was. And he had the dream job, right? He got paid to play basketball. Almost everybody knows who he is. Almost everybody's heard of him. Almost everyone that's ever tried to play basketball has wanted to be like Mike, right? I mean, it's just a constant theme. Today, Michael Jordan is worth over $1 billion. That's a lot of money. And I got a chance to watch a documentary on his life when he, in his late 50s now, was kind of reflecting back on all the things that happened, all the accomplishments, all the wealth, all the stuff. And he said something that I had to go back and look at it again. I couldn't believe that he said this, but we're going to put it on the screen for you. But he said, my mentality was to go out and win at any cost. And I like this next sermon. If you don't want to live that regimented mentality, then you don't need to be alongside of me. It's like, if that's not your game, then I don't want anything to do with you. A lot of people say they'd like to be Michael Jordan for a day or for a week, but let them try to be Michael Jordan for a year. See if they like it. Let them see. It's no fun. A guy that almost everybody would look at and say, successful, wealthy, accomplished. If anybody figured it out, it was him. And he's telling us, if you were me for a year, it wouldn't be any fun. I mean, if anybody could have figured out how to make work and money satisfying, you got to think it's him. And he says, no, it wasn't. It isn't. And if you watch the documentary over time, what you kind of find is there's this guy that's somewhat isolated. And yes, he gets to do all kinds of exotic things, but he has a kind of tragically shallow and empty life. And we're kind of like, well, if Michael Jordan doesn't have a chance, who does? How are we supposed to have a satisfying life if somebody like him can't even have one? In Ecclesiastes 4, if you've got a Bible and you want to track with us, or you've got the app, we're gonna look at the reflections of somebody who thought more deeply and lived larger than almost anyone else. He had incredible experiences, he had incredible resources, incredible opportunities, and he does something in chapter 4 and then a couple other places we're going to look at where he talks about work and wealth, and tries to bring a sense of perspective. And so in Ecclesiastes 4, we're going to take a couple verses at a time because there's so much to what he says that we really need to let it soak in for just a minute. So Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 4, and he's reflecting on work, okay? He says, and I saw that all toil and all achievement spring from one person's envy of another. This too is meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Fools fold their hands and ruin themselves. Better one handful with tranquility than two handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. And just kind of keep your finger there, but let's just stop for just a second. He's talking about work, and we're going to look at another area where he already talked about work that maybe brings a little more light to it. But he's in essence saying there is an element to this whole idea of work that's a little goofy. Now, he's not saying we shouldn't work. He's not saying you shouldn't work hard. He's saying when work becomes the vehicle for you feeling good about yourself, for you finding satisfaction in life, we have a problem. Because what happens is we can't help ourselves. We see what everybody else is doing and we compare ourselves and we envy what other people have accomplished. And we wonder, why don't we get that promotion? How come we don't get paid that way? How come the career I chose isn't as honorable or esteemed by other people? And he says, so what we do is one of two things. We get kind of frantic about it. And we start working obsessively, and we start going hard after it. And it's kind of, I read a guy who's talking about these guys. What we do is we shoot ourselves in one foot so we can hop faster on the other foot. I mean, it makes no sense. We're just kind of driving ourselves crazy to try and accomplish more, to try to find something elusive in our work that makes us feel good about our life. And he says the opposite isn't any better. And recently there's been this, huge push on quiet quitting, this idea that I'm just going to do the minimum. That's all you're going to get from me. I'm not working extra. I'm not giving any more. I'm just going to do the minimum, and I'm going to collect my check. I'm going to try to set myself up in the easiest job possible. I'm going to set myself up with the lowest expectations possible. I'm going to work from home. I'm going to do whatever I can do to lower the expectations and lower what's required of me and still get paid. And he says, in essence, being lazy isn't the answer either. Because when you're lazy, all you end up left with is yourself, which is what you started with. So what was the point of all of it? So he's kind of warning us. He's kind of waving a flag and saying, listen, not that work is bad, but if you're trying to use work as a tool to build a satisfying life, you're on the wrong track. And like I said, he talked about this before, and instead of having you flip all over the place, I want to put it on the screen for you. We can read it along. It comes from Ecclesiastes chapter 2. He tells us a little bit more about work. He says, in 2:20 through 24, he says, so my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. That is a poetic way. I got depressed about working so hard, right? For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, skill, and then they must leave all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This, too, is meaningless, a great misfortune. What do people get for all the toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All their days, their work is grief and pain, and even at night, their minds do not rest. This, too, is meaningless. Well, thanks, Pastor, for cheering me up about my job. I appreciate that. He's pointing out something. He's exaggerating. He's trying to get your attention. He's telling you, listen, even if you have a great job and you love going to work, which is not a bad thing, even if you work really hard at it, which that's good. If you're trying to make work, make your life meaningful, it's not going to work. It's a dog chasing its tail. It's not going to happen. And he uses kind of an extreme example. He says, listen, take this all the way to the end. I know it's hard to conceive of, but there's going to come a day where you're not here on this planet anymore. And he's saying, what's going to happen to all the things you accomplished, all the work you did, everything that you were known for, all the recognition you received, the status, the projects you completed, the things that you can point out. Look at what I did. Look at the work I did. He said, eventually, even Michael Jordan, it's going to be forgotten. There's going to come a time. Might be 10 years, might be 50 years, might be 100 years, might be 1,000 years from now. But your family, your friends, the people that knew you, the people that appreciated you are going to be gone as well, and all the work is forgotten. And he's pointing at something. He's pointing at something. He said, there's something in us. There is something in us that wants our life to go on beyond today. There is a spark of eternity within us. That there's got to be more than just what happens here and now. There's got to be more to it. When you go to the cemetery and you see the gravestones, there's got to be more to life than that. It doesn't just end there. There has to be. We long to have something beyond today. And for many, they look at work and think, well, if I could work enough, if I could accomplish enough, people would remember my name. And he's saying that's a dog chasing its tail. He says, you're right. There is something in you that longs for eternity, but work isn't the answer to that. Then he talks about money. He goes on and he kind of switches subjects, and work and money are so often tied together. And he talks about money in verse 7. He says this, then again, I saw something meaningless under the sun. He said, this isn't going to be any better. There was a man all alone. He had neither son nor brother, and there was no end to his toil. Yet his eyes were not content with his wealth. For whom am I toiling, he asked, and why am I depriving myself of enjoyment? This too is meaningless, a miserable business. I don't know if you know this. Jesus was talking one day about money, and they kind of had this discussion, and he was actually talking to some fairly wealthy people. And I don't remember right off the moment if they asked him or if Jesus just offered it up, but he made a statement. He said, there is no greater competitor for your heart that competes with God for your heart than money. He said, money is the greatest competitor for your heart. And the author here of Ecclesiastes basically paints this sad picture. Here's a guy who worked really hard, made a lot of money, had a lot of money. He prioritized his work and his money over people. And so he got to the point where he had a lot of money and he had no people. And he was alone. And he knew he needed to make more money, but he couldn't enjoy any of it. That's what money had done to him. And that's kind of the easy thing, if you're like me and you're a little kid, you remember growing up watching Scrooge McDuck on the Disney story of A Christmas Tale. It's like, yeah, we get that. The angry miser that just, piles up money and won't share and doesn't have anybody in his life. It's like, but that's not me. And I hope it isn't. But he's not done talking about money. As a matter of fact, if you flip over one page to chapter 5, verse 10, he tells us what money does. Now, be honest with me, okay? This is a generalization. He's not saying this happens to every person, every time, no matter what. He is saying these are the kind of things that happen to most people most of the time when it comes to money. Ecclesiastes 5:10, he says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. As goods increase, and so do those who consume them, and what benefit are they to the owners except to feast their eyes on them? The sleep of the laborer is sweet, whether they eat little or much, but as for the rich, Their abundance permits them no sleep. I have seen a grievous evil under the sun, wealth hoarded to the harm of its owners, and wealth lost through some misfortune, so that when they have children, there's nothing left for them to inherit. Everyone comes naked from their mother's womb, and as everyone comes, so they depart. They take nothing from their toil that they can carry in their hands. He kind of gives us this bullet list, and if we had a little more time, we'd spend more time on it, but to save time, I summarized a little bit of what he's saying. He says money does a couple of things. The first thing it does is money is addictive. Like, you just can't get enough. And no matter how much you get, you feel like you need to have more. When you're trying to get satisfaction from money, when it's about getting this thing or having amount or having this quote-unquote financial security that you're just determined to have because that's going to make your life great, he says addictive. It's addictive. It's like a drug. I mean, you get it and you feel good for the moment, and then you got to get some more. Number two, he said it attracts hangers on. People that are around you because you have money. People that are around you because you spend your money on them. People that are around you, again, because of the money, not because of you. It makes you a hoarder. You kind of have to always be circling the gates and protect and have and stack up and keep. It creates worries. I mean, even rappers know that, right? I got my mind on my money and my money on my mind, right? I mean, even the rappers know that. It ruins your character. When your focus is on cash, when you think the money is going to make you happy, it ruins your character. It can be quickly lost. Everybody kind of gets that one. And it won't last past death. Again, he comes back to this death thing. And you're like, dude, you seem to have like this focus on death. But he's making a point. No matter how much you stack up, no matter how much is in your investment account, no matter how many properties you own, no matter what you do, no matter what kind of business you run, no matter how much money you get, at some point, you are going to pass. And that money is going to somebody. It's going somewhere. And yeah, you might be able to direct some of it, but you can't direct all of it. And sooner or later, even the people you gave it to, you've lost control of what they're going to do with it. He said, if you're trying to build a satisfying life by building up money, it's not going to work. Now, don't get me wrong. Working hard, trying to find a job you love, being a good steward of the money you have, all those incredibly important things, those are not bad things. But attempting to find satisfaction from work and stacking cash is meaningless. That's what he's saying. He's being adamant about it. He's trying to show this from 5 different angles, that if that is the pursuit, it's a dog chasing its tail. It won't work. It doesn't mean that nobody does it. It doesn't mean that playlist isn't going off in your head. But it does mean that at the end, it's going to feel very empty. The meaning you were looking for isn't going to be there. The satisfaction that you wanted in life isn't ever going to come. Because you can never work enough. You can never make enough. You can never secure enough to say, I'm finally satisfied. It doesn't work that way. I don't know about you. My guess is you're a lot like me. And we kind of came out of the box with a default setting. And that default setting was that I process everything through me. Because I don't know how else to do it, right? So no matter what's happening around me, I process it through, how does that affect me? How does that impact me? It doesn't, so I ignore it, or it does, and so now I deal with it. Most of the questions that we have, the big questions, of course, have to do with us. Like, what am I doing with my life? Am I marrying the right person? Is this the right career? Should I make this change? Whatever it might be. With the big questions, we all process through our own grid internally. But even, we micromanage even the day-to-day, don't we? Something happens that, well, how does it make me feel? Do I like it? Do I not like it? Does it make me feel anxious and afraid, or does it make me feel excited and happy? We process everything through a filter of us. And he's about to offer us a different filter. He's going to foreshadow a little bit of a solution, because he's not just poking holes in everything. He wants to bring a solution to the table. And so if you finish chapter 4, verse 9, he says this: 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, two can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Now, if you're a church person and you've been to a lot of weddings, you've probably heard that before. I don't know if you knew it was in response to chasing life, and chasing money, and chasing work as a solution. And he's pointing something out. He said, I know that most of us process the world just through us, how everything relates to me. But he gives us a hint here and an answer that living for we, not me, makes a more satisfying life. Living for we, not me. It's not just me. It's not how everything affects me. It's not about me. It's not me seeing everything and how I feel about everything. It's we. We leads to satisfying. You're like, well, how does that work? That doesn't really sound right. What is he doing? And you got to understand, we are walking along with a wise guide, okay? He is setting us up along the way. If you were with us, he talked at the very beginning. He told us, he's kind of like, hey, don't waste your life ignoring the things that are true, because when you ignore what is true, you end up grabbing for things that are empty and you try to build your life on something hollow. He's like, don't do that. And then last week we talked about the fact that, hey, some of us sometimes we kind of get convinced that the way to find the life we're after is just to know enough stuff. That if I can get enough knowledge, if I can understand enough things, that somehow, some way, if I know enough stuff, then I'll be satisfied. And he's like, no, he kind of pops that bubble. And then today he comes along and he says, for others that think it's work or maybe it's money, he kind of pops those bubbles. And he finally starts to show us just a little flicker. I promise you, if you stick with us, we're going to get there eventually. But he shows us a little flicker and he says, no, that's not where satisfaction comes from. Satisfaction comes from we, not me. He gives us a different frame of reference to look at what's happening outside and around us and what's happening inside of us. And it's not one that most people go to. It's not the norm. But maybe that's the point, right? If most people aren't finding their life to be very satisfying, doing what everybody else is doing doesn't make much sense. And he's saying there's something different here. There's something else. There's a different way. Most people don't go there because that's not their default. But we is more satisfying. Is a more satisfying life than me. And what he's going to do, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. He feels like he's found the answer to the satisfying life. And the best way I can illustrate that is, it's almost like he's holding up a diamond. And if you've ever looked at a real diamond, it's amazing. Almost every time you change the angle, you're still looking at the same diamond, but you see a little something else. You see a color a different way. You see something reflected or refracted a different way. And it's almost like it's a different experience every time you look at the diamond from a different direction. And that's exactly what he's doing. He's saying there's a satisfying life out there. And he said the first way, the first view, the first angle I want you to see it from is, it comes through relationships. It doesn't come through knowing enough stuff, working hard enough, or having enough money. There's a different question that we need to ask. Now, you, and the reason I say you is because I know you, and the reason I know you is because I do the same thing. You tend to want to live in a bubble. Because who wouldn't? The world is an ugly, scary place. There's all kinds of bad things going out there. And so it's easier to live in a bubble. Especially if you feel like my life isn't all that satisfying. We want to create a bubble around us that allows us to kind of convince ourselves everything's okay. Everything's going to be great. I'm fine. And we do it through a couple of different ways. We do it through distraction, whether it's scrolling or streaming, or whether it's taking trips, or if I can get the kids into this next thing, or if we can get into that school, if we can go to this place, we got to have these experiences. We're going to do this stuff. And we just kind of basically try to distract ourselves. We're just going to stay distracted so I don't have to deal with it. As we talked about today, some people, it's an intense focus on work. I don't really care about the rest of the world because I'm so laser focused on the work that I'm doing. I'm so convinced that what I'm doing is going to make a difference, is going to be an important thing, and it's going to bring my life meaning, that I'm not going to deal with all the other stuff. Same way with money, and you see how that works. Focused on getting more, and so I ignore everything else. And I live in this bubble because I don't want to deal with the stuff out there. The writer of Ecclesiastes keeps coming along, and he's a persistent little guy, and he keeps popping that bubble. he keeps going, nope, that's not going to work. Nope, you can't do that. And the thing he pops it with is the one thing we don't want to deal with. We don't want to think about. He keeps coming back to it. It's almost like if you knew this guy, the first words out of his mouth every time you saw him would be, well, you're going to die, right? It's like, dude, you're not helping. He keeps coming back to it. He keeps coming back to death. But he doesn't do it as death is something ugly and horrible and to be avoided. He almost talks about death like it's a good thing. The point he's trying to get to is that life in God's world is a gift. It's not gain. Life in God's world is a gift that you get. It is not something that you gain. Like, well, how does all that work together then? It works like this. You see, when we actually spend some time thinking about death, which I know is not a fun thing to think about, but when we do, here's what happens. If we feel like we want to live a satisfying life, death is almost like this deadline out there. Well, I got to get a lot of stuff done before I get to that then. I've got to accomplish a lot of things, or I've got to learn a lot of stuff, or I've got to make a lot of money. And it's kind of like I have this deadline looming over me that I got to get all this stuff done before I die because the clock is ticking and I want to get a satisfying life before I die. That's living a life as though you have to gain something. And God is on the other side of that. He's saying, I want to give you a gift. Life is a gift. Relationships are a gift. We're going to discover some other gifts that God gives us. And he's telling us, he's kind of setting us up. He's getting us started. Like I said, this is a little bit of a preview. This is a little bit of a foreshadowing. He's kind of telling you, there's something coming. There's going to be a big reveal as we get to the end of this thing. And what you're going to find is, God wants you to have a satisfying life too. God is for you. As a matter of fact, he is so for you, he's already given you everything you need for a satisfying life. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to chase it. You don't have to gain it because God has already given it. I mean, it's astounding, really, because it turns everything on its ear. All those playlists, all that stuff, all those things that we've been told, the lies that we've been believing that, well, no, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to earn it, I have to. No, you don't. Wow. I mean, think for just a minute. If you really believe that I am entitled to, have been given a satisfying life from God, and all I have to do is receive it. I don't have to gain anything. I don't have to prove anything. I don't have to scratch and claw and grind and find and grab and hold. He already gave it to me. Whew. And I know for some of you, it's like, that's hard. I mean, I didn't grow up that way. I haven't thought that way. But for just a moment, what if that was true? How different would you feel about your life? It doesn't mean you're not going to hit speed bumps. It doesn't mean you're not going to have struggles. But how different would you feel about your life if you knew that God had already given you a satisfying life and your only responsibility was to receive it? Well, see, that's liberating. That's freeing. That's very different than what everybody else says. That doesn't line up with all the other stuff. And one of God's good gifts is relationships. So I want to ask you a question today. As you think about your relationships and you think about your life, you think about where you spend the time, the things that you do, what you're investing in. And this is not intended to make you feel guilty or intended to build you up. This is just intended for you to think through the question. When you think about all the things that you do, who do you do it for? Like, really, who do you do it for? All the stuff you're doing, all the busyness, all the things. And I'm not making a value judgment on it one way or another. I don't know if it's good or bad, whatever. But down at your core, who are you doing it for? And can I just give you one little, it's easy, especially as a guy, I can't think like a woman because I'm not, but I mean, as a guy, it's easy to answer that question. Well, I'm doing it for my wife, I'm doing it for my kids, I'm doing it for my family. And maybe that's true. I hope that that's true. But sometimes I'm doing it for me, but I'm saying I'm doing it for them. This is a tough question, but it's an incredibly important question. Because what it drives at is that back to that idea, am I living for me or living for we? Because if most of what I'm doing is for me, then again, this isn't a judgment, beat you up kind of thing. This is a, hey, that's something you should pay attention to. There may be some things you need to let go of, that you need to pass on, maybe some attitudes that need to change so that relationship, which is going to bring you a satisfying life, can thrive. If I'm too busy learning things, working, making money, doing this stuff, if I'm too busy doing that, and ultimately I'm really doing it for me, if I'm too busy with that, the relationships fall by the wayside. God is telling us the path to satisfaction is to let some of that stuff fall to the wayside and put an emphasis on the relationship. And I love, I try to summarize all the time. And kind of what I summarize from all of this, and I hope this is helpful for you, is there's a great question that I can start to ask myself on a constant basis. Instead of asking kind of the normal stuff, and the things that run through your head, how am I doing, what do I like, what don't I like, and did I enjoy that, did I not enjoy that, is my life on the right track? Instead of asking about me, in my head, in my heart, asking a question, how are we doing? How are we doing? It's a totally different question. And it puts a huge emphasis on relationships. How are we doing? So different than what about me? And I want to pick on the guys for just a minute. Guys, come on. What if every time you connected with somebody at your family, and for a lot of us, that's when we go home at the end of the day, or we come home and the people are there, or whatever it is. What if we started asking the question, how are we doing? How are we doing? When it comes to my family, instead of putting my focus and heart and energy on how I'm feeling and what's going on in my world and how I think and what I want and what I got and what I didn't get and what I'm happy about, what I'm frustrated about, what if I just walked in? And I looked around, the people there, and I said, how are we doing? How are we doing? Because it'll guide you on what you need to do next. And the beauty of this question is, you can take it anywhere. You can take it with you to work. When you walk into work, some of you go into school or you go into the office or you go wherever you go or you log on or whatever you're doing, you go into work. And instead of asking the question about how's my boss treating me and do I like what I'm doing and do I like this assignment and, how come I'm underpaid and, all the stuff that goes with it, or I can't believe, I'm going to be able to accomplish this. I crushed my goals. I did all this stuff. Those are great. But what if, when you went to work, connected with work, you asked the question, how are we doing? How are the people that I'm working with, how are they doing? I'll give you one more. I love that you're here. The Mountain Ridge exists for you. We want to bring people back to God. And I've said it many, many times, the church. Church is not an institution. It's not a building. It's not the name out there. It's not a listing in Google. It's not some structure or nameless, faceless organization. The church is who you're sitting with. The church is people that have said, I'm going to love and follow Jesus, and I want to love him, and I'm going to love the people that I'm doing it with. That is the church. What if? The question you asked when you came to church, and believe me, I'm the first one in the donut line, okay? It's not about what am I getting, where did I park, what do I like, what don't I like, is the song the one I want, did I like what the preacher said? But what if the first question that we asked when we came and connected with our church family was, how are we doing? How are we doing? You see how that so powerfully changes the dynamics of everything. And this isn't just for the sake of being a nice person. God is telling us. He's giving us a preview. He's saying if you want that satisfying life, start asking that question. How are we doing? Because ultimately, God wants to be in a relationship with you. And that relationship with him, he calls you into, to abide, to live with him, to be connected to him in relationship. And so therefore, it's not even really about me anymore. It's about him. And then all of a sudden, he's put all of these people around me to be in relationship with. And now the question, how are we doing, makes so much sense. How am I doing with God? How am I doing with you? That's where it all starts. That's where it all comes from. The satisfying life. What does it look like to abide with God? And to do well with the people around me. And the beauty of this is the partial answer. This is the beginning of the answer that we're going to find in Ecclesiastes. See, we all want to live a satisfying life. And you should. That is a good desire. And satisfaction, we talked about this. How do you get satisfied? Satisfaction comes from getting what you want. You just have to know what you want. And the author of Ecclesiastes, God is speaking through him, and he's trying to tell us, make sure you want the right things, because I want you to have a satisfying life. So I encourage you today to recognize and realize it begins, it works through the relationships that you have with God and with other people. Let's pray together. Father, thank you so much for this day. Thank you for the words that sometimes do poke a hole in our bubble, that force us to realize that maybe we've been believing something that wasn't true. And God, I know there's people in here today that have heard this, and it has actually been so encouraging, and I'm so thankful for what you're doing in their heart and their life, that they are being encouraged and lifted up and finding value in what they're hearing, because it's confirming the life they've been pursuing with you. They've found that satisfaction in you, and they're finding that satisfaction in others, and this is just a pat on the back and a keep it going kind of moment. But God, wherever we are, whether we're feeling confirmed or convicted or somewhere in between, God, I pray that you would keep pressing into us. Keep showing us what life looks like, the life you created us to live, how it looks, how it feels, how it works. Father, give us the courage to look at hard things. And Father, give us the humility to receive the gift that you want to give us. God, we love you, and we thank you. Pray that you would continue to speak to us as we worship you. In Jesus' name, amen.